This is what we are here to see tonight. Very excited to show off Stepping Off the Boat, Stories from North Manitou Island. And I'm making sure to show it off in person and to those who are watching at home. So excited to have this book in person for the library here at the museum. I know several of you have already ordered it from us. The photographs, not only the ones from the Chicago Maritime Museum, really reproduced beautifully. And I don't know about you, but I could not be happier with how it turned out. Now, I am curious, has anyone here, I know Sandy is a yes, but has anyone else ever been to the Chicago Maritime Museum before? So it was almost everyone's first trip. Wonderful. Now, I know not everyone is from the Chicago area, but I'm sure you're all quite well connected. So please tell your Midwestern friends to come visit us.
We'll spread the word south.
Yes, thank you. Any direction. Chicago is a hub. If someone's at O'Hare for a long layover, tell them to go to Bridgeport. Well, it's just about 7 o'clock, so I think I'm going to introduce our illustrious speaker this evening. Now, I don't need to introduce her to most of you, but because we have a whole other audience watching at home, and because this will end up going on our YouTube page, I will introduce Susan Hollister Wasserman more formally. Now, her eclectic professional life has included a BA degree in history from Antioch College. Later, she did legal research in the 1980s for a Washington, D.C. law firm. Her work included the case investigating Woburn, Massachusetts groundwater pollution, which caused numerous leukemia deaths in local children and was the basis for both the book and movie as civil action. Her research skills were further honed while doing the title work for Martha's Vineyard Law Firm. She is the 2022 Leelanau Historical Society Research Fellow. Susan Hollister Wasserman lives on Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts with her husband Bob and travels back and forth stepping off boats to reach one island or another. Like I said, she is here today promoting her brand new book, Stepping Off the Boat, Stories of North Manitou Island, which heavily features material from the Chicago Maritime Museum's collection. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Susan Wasserman.
Thank you, Madeline. It's a real treat to be here. I'm going to set the stage for tonight's presentation, give just a few topic introductions, and then some narrative. So this is downtown Chicago in the late 1800s. Look at all the horses, traffic jam, but it was horse, not automobiles. And this is an official photograph from the Columbian exhibition held in Chicago, the World's Fair held in Chicago in 1893. 2 million people visited this World's Fair over the course of 6 months. The fair was designed, always intended to have the buildings torn down and the materials recycled. So it wasn't to be permanent, and it figures in our narrative a little bit later. I thought it would be helpful for those people who haven't been to North Manitou or don't know Lake Michigan too well to take a quick look at this early 1800 called tourist map and see where the island actually is. North Manitou is 250 miles north of Chicago. Chicago is called the head of the lake. That's confusing for some people because it's south, but and it was the gateway to the Midwest. Let's see, here we are, Manitou Passage. So we're moving up north, and this is from a poster that was very popular in Leelanau. It shows the two islands, North Manitou, South Manitou, and the mainland. The lake is clearly marked, and the water on the right-hand side is Traverse Bay. Here is this is the Missouri. This is one of the many steamers that carried first freight in the 1870s, 1860s, 1870s. And gradually, as people were interested in coming north, they added decks to these steamers so that the passengers were on the upper levels. They could hold about 200 people and had bands, elegant. I read, there's something in the book, I think, that the food rivaled any luxury hotel available in this time period. And here's an interior shot of the Missouri. This is the lounge, the velvet banks, and the and all the Victorian gewgaws. Here's a picture of a sister ship. There were three main ships that went from Chicago north. And this is the Illinois at the North Manitou dock. And one of the interesting things about this era is I'm concentrating on the commerce and the people who went from Chicago north in Michigan, but it's mirrored on the east coast of Wisconsin, where an equal number of ships and resorters traveled on large boats north to resort areas. See. Here's an aerial photograph of what North Manitou Island looks like. Just to give you some orientation, obviously, it's primarily wooded, and there are two inland lakes. The size of the island, I think we're gonna get to. This is a map with the roads and the clearings. My mother did the sketches around the outside, so I'm particularly fond of this map. People ask me how big is North Manitou, and it's a little hard to equate it with Manhattan, but it's exactly the size of Manhattan. It was heavily wooded and lumbered 3 different times. The history of the island has preserved many of the family names and early in history of the early settlers. So we're on to the resort part of this. We're talking about the Victorian era, romantic ideals. The man pictured here is Silas R. Boardman. He owned the eastern half of the island, and he must have had some pretty robust Chicago connections, because he was able to promote his resort in a Sunday supplement from the Chicago Tribune in August of 1894. And I'm going to quote from that because I think it's so amusing. It was very fanciful article, but obviously trying to entice people to come to North Manitou. The article says, all islands which have anything of a mystery surrounding them have hermits. North Manitou has one. His name is Bulbous, and he lives in the hearts of the woods away from all other settlers on the island, and he rarely ever sees another human being. So we're still looking for Bulbous. Mr. Boardman established a large working cattle farm. He raised prized Percheron horses. He planted fruit trees in conjunction with the Stark family in Missouri. They were the people who invented the red delicious apple. And so he was very important in the history of the island. He had a daughter who for her teenage years, had lived with Silas and his wife, Catherine. And then she went to Chicago and she married. She happened to live in a neighborhood on the south side, just below where the University of Chicago is now. And it must have been the women in this group that became very good friends. The children played together, and her name was Carrie Boardman Blossom. She planned in the summer of 1893 to go home with her. She had 2 children by that time, and she decided to go home to spend a couple of months with her parents. And she said to my great-grandmother and to another next door neighbor, why don't you come home with me? It's a great place. You'll love it. And maybe these families were already thinking about a resort or doing something for summertime. I don't have any exact information about that, but the 3 families took a carriage to the docks, got on the steamer, spent the night, ended up the next day on North Manitou. And my grandmother in later years wrote a memoir about these. She was 12, and she wrote how much she fell in love with the island. She wrote that these families looked at several different places as possible resort developments. They looked at Lake Leelanau, they looked up in Harbor Springs, and she was just praying, literally praying, that they would choose the island because she had already completely fallen in love with North Manitou. After investigating the other options, 3 of these families worked out an arrangement with Mr. Boardman to purchase 30 acres on the bluff that overlooked Lake Michigan. So that was 1893. Here's one of my favorite photographs in the book. My publisher, Barbara Spiker, found this wonderful picture. This is the surveyor, Billy Green, W.O. Green in the deed documents, and he set out 10 cottage lots down by the beach woods. This is a diagram of the eventual development on North Manitou. The building to the far left, number 1, was the first lot, and the lots ran along the bluff, as you can see, up to number 10. Most of those by 1924, most of them had been built on. 2 were never built on. The 2 buildings on the right, Monte Carlo and the lodge, I'm going to speak to you about in a minute. And then to the far right was that there are more buildings than are depicted here. Was the farmyard. We'll see some photos of that. Very, very elaborate barns and sheds for the large farming operation. You can see the cherry orchards, and on the lakefront itself was the life-saving service. Starting early, 1855, there was a volunteer service because the shipping and the amount of and the number of boats on the lake had increased to the point where it was very, very important to have some rescue capability, and that complex grew and changed over time. This is a photo standing on the big dock looking west, and so you can see right-hand side the farm buildings, the 2 buildings there sort of in the middle or up on the bluff. This doesn't give you much of the topography, sense of topography, but that's Monte Carlo and the lodge. The buildings on the left-hand side are the Coast Guard. It's a Coast Guard station. Here's a picture of what the resort development became known as Cottage Row. And so this is just a shot showing the bluff And because you're up a little way, have a good view of the lake. And the way the development was constructed is that all the land below where you're looking was open and park and designed, people could have a cabana, or I don't know that they ever did, but the idea was to keep it open so that everybody would have a view of the lake. By 1896, a boardwalk had been constructed all along the bluff in front of these cottages. It was lit by gas lanterns. There was a person designated. He came into the village every evening in the resort season, lit the lanterns, and so these amenities. It was very simple though. There weren't a lot of other amenities. This is a photograph of the board looking down, looking north on the boardwalk. So you can see one of the cottages on the left. This is Great Uncle Fred. The cute thing. I don't know whether that's a hat or a bucket. He could have easily been a bucket on his head. The gas lights, and then the buildings on the far right are the Coast Guard. Is the Coast Guard station, and that's right on the lake.
Is the one?
Yes, I'm going to talk about. That's a pagoda. The building on the mid right is the pagoda post office and general store. The cottages. This is where we come back to the Columbian Exposition. My great grandfather had a booth in the manufacturer's building, and after the fair closed, he took stained glass windows, moldings, building materials, and the following spring put all of that on the steamer along with 2 carpenters and sent them north to build the first cottage. The cottages had a central, they had porches or openings to the front. They had a central hallway, and bedrooms were off to the right and to the left. There were no kitchens because everybody ate communally, and the outhouses there was no bathrooms because there was no running water, there was no electricity, and so the outhouses were in the back, and we're going to see that they show up in some of the pictures. There were some unique buildings along with the cottages themselves. This is a tree house that was built by the Rhodes family for their young daughter Margaret, and later a bottom was added. Her boyfriend and then husband Roderick Peedy wrote, Margaret on the island did not live in her parents' cottage. She lived in a treehouse. After we married, there was a blessed event. At first, she used to climb up and then pull up the baby in a basket. But later, a first floor was added between the tree level and the ground. How the old islander carpenter grumbled. It was the first time he'd ever built a house from the top down. And the old island carpenter was Nicholas Phelan, the same man that my great-grandfather had put on the steamer in 1894. And he lived out his life on the island and built all the cottages. And his brother later joined him, also had part of the construction. And he died on the island in 1939. And Ginny was asking about the post office, the pagoda. This was both a post office and a general store. This photo is probably from very early, right after the building had been built. Jack Hobie in his book talks about this structure as being very common along the Michigan shore at that time. But it seems to me to be quite unique. Certainly the way it looked. This was the last cottage. Look, just mentioned the building to the left is the outhouse. This was the last cottage. The Riggs Cottage was built in 1924. And by 1924, it was built with the kitchen. Kitchens were added about 1910. I'll say something about that in a minute. So here are the two buildings. If you remember, along Cottage Row, there was a space, a field, and then there were two other buildings. This is Monte Carlo on the left, the dining room, also known as a lodge, also known as a hotel. The dining room was where people ate communally. There was a large stage for theater productions. There were more than 13 bedrooms in this building, and it was, until it burned in 1956, it was central to island for island visitors. By about 1899, Silas Boardman had financial difficulties. Shipping was beginning to change. People found that agricultural products were very difficult to grow on the island and transport to the mainland. Often weather intervened. It became more expensive, and they were, as roads and railroads were developed, there was more competition. So the Newhalls, Chicago connection, Chicago family from Glencoe, had an interest in the island and had been involved in the fruit cherry orchard business for a while. I think they probably had Mr. Boardman's mortgage and took possession of the island. The women in this picture on the left is Mary Bernique, the middle woman with the white hat, white scarf, and white dress is my great-grandmother. Hazel Newhall is to the right, and then my Aunt Peg, Josephine Ross's daughter, my grandmother's sister, is on the far right. The Newhalls were prominent Chicago people. This is just a little squib in the Inter-Ocean newspaper that talks about the ownership change. Franklin Newhall, there were three generations of Newhalls. Franklin Newhall was known as the Apple King. He was very instrumental in Chicago trade, and he developed a strain of apples under the Manitou brand. And there's quite a bit of literature about how he packed his fruit and how he kept it in storage. And he was very, very well respected as for his wholesale fruit business. My grandmother remembered what a wonderful time that resort era was, from about 1900 to 1910 or 1911. So she, and here is a copy of the brochure. John Newhall must have had a great sense of humor. I loved, he says, to former visitors, same old thing, same boats, old horses, same fare, same dinner bell, anyway. He promoted, so clearly they were still trying to promote the island and increase their income, but there are letters in this, actually the museum collection, that indicate that they were under a great deal of financial pressure, and he's exploring in those letters selling timber. So the island had been cut over in 1840s for steamers and for cordwood to power the steamers. And by this period of time, the trees had grown back. The second growth on the mainland had been harvested, And there was still a tremendous demand for lumber to build and for furniture. So it became economically viable to harvest this second growth on the island. And I'll go back to that in just a minute. Here, so what did people in the resort do? I mean, it wasn't a fancy place. This is my grandmother in white in a theatrical performance of some kind with one of the cottages in the background. People play games. And I love this traveling piano. That was used for theater and for sing-alongs and I've just, like, who would have thought? And of course, baseball, the national pastime. This is a game right off the boardwalk. Those two cottages in the back were built by the Newhall family. And when my grandmother says 40 or 50 people, where did they stay? Well, there were a number of bedrooms in these cottages. One of the other things that people loved to do was explore the island. There's a very famous, famous if you on Manitou, famous sand dune in the south eastern corner called Old Baldy. There's the Lake Tamarack, bullfrogs. This is my mother's brother, my Uncle John, is on the left, and a family friend, Louise Rhodes, is on the right. This, I'm sorry that we've tried to make this picture a little bit brighter. This is a picture of the Little Lake, which is the larger inland lake. These are students from the University of Chicago. This picture was taken in 1898. They were doing with famous Henry C. Coles, they were doing an investigation of flora on Michigan islands. And the University of Chicago has a collection of almost 100 photographs of that North Manitou expedition. That's this wonderful woman. You can't really see. The woman in the tree has a long skirt on, traipsing through the woods with appropriately attired. So here's just a photo to show what the orchards, the fruit look like. These are cherry trees. So 1910, 1911, the dining room was closed. People added kitchens to their own cottages because the lumbering operation started with Peter Stormer from Empire was hired to extract timber from the east side of the island. This is something called a big wheel. It was invented in Michigan. It allowed very, very heavy logs and long logs to be transported. The cottage on the right is Monte Carlo, and the lodge is on the left, and prominent privy in the middle. Here, that's what 400 million board feet of lumber looks like. People have commented that here we are in this resort place, and there's all this industrial activity, and apparently that was not uncommon, and people didn't really think much about it. These guys are pushing the logs onto what's on this chain that goes along, is called a bull chain. They're loading the logs onto the bull chain. It's coming across, and it's hard to see, but in the background on the right is a lumber barge that's going to take these logs to Empire, to the sawmill, to be produced. And here's just another copy of this is the Newhall lumbering operation. My mother wrote about resort life, and she said that in the first 3 decades, everybody walked everywhere. Even the smallest child carried a toasting fork or a frying pan reading out loud on pleasant afternoons or visiting with family and friends were just regular pastimes. I think several times a week, people especially after the dining hall closed, people ate on the beach. They went regularly to the little lake for swimming and boating. Fishing was a big activity, and they would eat. Of course, they were also accustomed to eating communally. That was just a part of the world. So she wrote that the chief attractions were the beauty of the island itself, the opportunity to spend time with old friends and their families. There was no concerted effort to bring in new people, and as the years passed, the summer population gradually diminished. World events obviously come into play. The island was very isolated, it's 12 miles out, but you couldn't help but be affected. World War I, the development of railroads and roads. There were fewer steamers. It was harder and harder to get goods to market from the island, and there was more and more competition on the mainland. So the resort era really, by 1922, was finished, and the island changed dramatically. This was a period of time right in the early 1920s when the Newhalls couldn't pay their mortgage, lost the island to a group of Chicago businessmen, were called the Syndicate, and and gradually that group consolidated down to one man. By 1927 or 1928, William Angell owned most of the island, more than just the eastern half, and his dream was to create a private hunting and fishing preserve for himself and his friends, and that really the resort era was done. So this again is one of my favorite pictures. Look at the ice. Look at these guys. This is the mailboat at the big dock, and you guys are having climb up this ladder with ice and snow. There was no Gore-Tex. It was all just wet wool, and it really was a different. It's hard to imagine in some ways this life. It was very, very different. It was really much more primitive than what we have to do, what we have to deal with today. There were cisterns that pumped well water, that used outhouses, privies. Lamps and commodes had to be cleaned daily. Island visitors didn't come with servants. They hired some of the farm women to do things, but no refrigerators. The ice was still cut on the little lake, and even in the 50s, we had an ice box. No washing machines, so more than 200 feet of snow a winter. Often the lake froze, much more regularly froze between the islands and the mainland than it does today. So what I hope that the pictures in the book can convey is a way of imagining and understanding a life that's really quite different from what we experience. Islands are special. Some of you may be familiar with Rachel Field and this wonderful poem she wrote in the 30s. And it's magical. Maybe it's because islands have a geographical boundary. The sense of community is strong. There really is. You get on those boats to go someplace, and it's a bit magical. So I just wanted to share that with you. My book is not there hasn't been a book about North Manitou for generations. decades. And it just happens that in 2025, there are 2 books. Mine is a general overview of the island and the progression. And Bill and Karen Rosa have written a wonderful book about the West Side lumbering history, which was going on at the same time the Stormers were, roughly the same time the Stormers were logging the East Side. There was a major logging operation on the West Side. Almost 300 people lived at Crescent at one point between 1907 and 1915. There was a railroad that went out into the woods, and Bill Rose's grandmother had collected, she lived at Crescent, and she collected wonderful, wonderful photographs. And he and Karen have put together just this remarkable book. So if you have interest in knowing more about North Manitou, I encourage you to get that book as well. I would be remiss in not mentioning the importance to me of the John Newhall collection here at the Maritime Museum, the University of Chicago Special Collection, Leelanau Historical Society, and the Seeker family gave me the 20, as Madeline mentioned, 2022 fellowship to do this work. They also supplied many, the vast majority of the images, and that meant scanning. They were just wonderfully supportive of the work. The Jill Cheney collection at the Empire Museum was very important. My publishers, the Leelanau Press, and then many of the other items in the book came from family photos and memorabilia. So, and I'd be very, very glad to entertain questions.
Well, Susie, thank you. That was fabulous. I am saying this right now because my computer is unmuted, so I can tell the people here and at home that you can ask any questions you have now to Susan. If you have questions at home, just put them in the chat and I will ask them out loud. One question in the audience already.
Okay, okay. Yeah, please.
Hey, my name is Betsy, and are there any people living on the island now?
Well, of course, that's a very good question. The island now is part of the national park. In the consolidated ownership under Bill Angel, he developed a foundation. He died in 1950, but his dream of deer had been introduced and some fish had been introduced, and so the dream of having a hunting and fishing preserve came to fruition. And the trust, and then very fast forward, when the Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore was under consideration by Congress, there were a number of bills over a number of years that were introduced to create a national park. And the primary goal of that park was to preserve Sleeping Bear Dune and marvelous natural resources on the mainland. Sometimes in the bill, one of the islands would be in the bill, sometimes both islands. Several times the bill was introduced with no islands. But in the 70s, when the bill finally passed Congress, both islands happened to be in that bill that passed. So then there was a long-term negotiation about purchasing the land, and gradually a lot of the property on the mainland was purchased. South Manitou was purchased But North Manitou, it was a very lowball figure that was offered for this vast amount of territory. So the trustees of the Manitou Island Association took the government to court, and eventually, after 7 years, the purchase price was increased from $4 million to $12.2 million. So in that all was finalized in 1985, and since 1985, the island has been part of the national park. Yeah.
Back in the era of the island, how long do you think it took to travel from Chicago to North Manitou?
Oh, great question, Ron. It was overnight. You got on the steamer in the late afternoon, you had dinner, you could dance, you went to bed, and you woke up midday, or you didn't wake up midday, but by midday, you were in northern Michigan. And if you're going all the way to Mackinac, then you probably had to stay on the steamer till the late afternoon. But the steamer schedule coming into North Manitou was anywhere from noon to 2:30 in the afternoon. So that was running. I mean, for me, excuse me.
Is hunting still allowed?
Yes, there is a deer herd of several hundred deer that it's what the island can now sustain. And each fall, there's one hunt, and people can apply for a hunting permit. And the boat that goes out takes one large group, and they stay, well, if they're lucky, they stay 3 or 4 days. If they get storm bound, they can stay 6 or 7 days. And so it's, once in the fall. Kathy.
You've obviously spent much of your life every summer coming to the island. And I'm wondering if you replay over the years, looking back and forward, how you think about how has your day on the island changed from when you were a child to today?
Yeah, it certainly has changed. Kathy's asking about the change from the 40s to now. Up until the park took over, there was quite a community on the island. It varied depending on, early on, they were still picking cherries, and there was a large farming operation. And so there were quite a few more employees. And then that tapered off because, again, the transportation of those cherries to market became problematic. So I think the last cherry crop was, commercial cherry crop was about 1956. But even so, there were always employees, a manager, his wife. During part of the time we were growing up, there was another lumbering operation, and so there were people associated with the lumber camp. And a lot of the cottages were still in use. So I know some family members rented some of the cottages, and some of the original cottage owners still had cottages. Once the park took over, we are now the only private owners there. So while there are park employees and there are lots of campers, the whole social structure and all has completely changed. Jenny.
Well, the other thing that you didn't mention was that they used to allow motorized vehicles on the
That's a good point.
Now they
So there were cars and trucks, and we could have a dog, and it was very easy to get around. And now the park does not allow private animals, and it's a wilderness area, other than just the 18 acres in the village. So a little more than 18, but anyway, just the village area, and it has motorized vehicles, but it's walking every place now. So that's another. Madeline.
I've got a question online from Loyola Professor Emeritus Ted Kiermansky. Hi, Ted. He would like to know what type of settlement activity took place on the southern end of the island. And he thinks he remembers the Park Service trying to look into saving one of the residences there.
Okay, there was one summer resort, a large farm, homesteaded for the Bernique family in about 1900, eventually homesteaded 400 acres. And that was the largest proven homestead on the island. And so that's 3 miles south of the village. There was also, until the 30s, the lighthouse. There was a lighthouse on the point, and there was a keeper and an assistant, and those two families were on the southern end. But the primary, other than the period of time at Crescent, when that village was operating, the primary settlement was in the village area that you saw. Sure.
So the Andersons and the Fredericksons, or down there,
Yep.
when were, this goes to your point, when were those settled, and were those farms, working farms, and?
So all of these areas here, Johnson, Frederickson, Anderson, those were late 1800s. They were homesteaded. The Phelan, I remember I told you about Nick Phelan, the builder. He and his brother had a farm there. They lived actually much closer to the village where the school was, but almost all of these names that clearings on the map were 1900 or before. Joan.
I know that when you were there as a child, the only transportation was from Leland, and you got your provisions from there.
Right.
During the resort era, did the food come over from Leland, or was it just from the steamer coming up once a week?
Yeah, we did one of the things I didn't touch on for this was the mail boat from Leland. The mail contract started in the 1880s and provided regular mail service and grocery service to the island. The Grosvenor family took that over in 1918, and they're still running the concession now for the park. We did primarily the groceries, I think, by the turn of the century, the groceries did come from that. I mean, as long as there were farms and all, there was quite a bit of produce and all that was raised and consumed on the island. But the mail boat was the source of other things, and Sears Roebuck was vital to clothing people and providing our cottage. The cottage that my family owned actually burned. The second cottage burned in 1934, and my grandmother purchased a kit from Sears Roebuck, and Nick Phelan constructed the small cottage that we still have today from a Sears Roebuck cabin. Yeah, Bernie.
Lake Manitou, is it fed from the big lake? Like, is there a stream that goes in there?
The inland lakes are spring fed, and the little lake that's the one Lake Manitou is several hundred feet above Lake Michigan, and so much of the year there's a stream, and what's called the outlet, that runs northeast from the little lake to the big lake and drops down into the water drops down into the big lake. It's 90 feet. It's a pretty impressive inland lake. It's beautiful. It's 90 feet deep, clear water, fabulous fishing. Yeah. It's only primitive camping, so wilderness camping. Yes, but there are regulations. There's one campground where you can have there's a fire ring and you can have a fire. Yeah.
What buildings?
What buildings are still there? Let me see if I can show. There a few. Building number 1 was the Shepherd Cottage here on the left-hand side. Preserving Sleeping Bear has renovated that cottage. They've done a beautiful job, and I think they're hoping to do maybe Elder Hostel or Rhodes Scholar or something. The cottages 2 and 3 have both succumbed. Cottage 4 is still in very good condition. We always knew it as Fisk Cottage, and that I think that is going to get some more attention this coming year and be used to house volunteers. Cottage number 5 was the first cottage that my great-grandfather built. That's still standing, has a roof. It needs a lot of work. Then moving down the line, 6 is gone. 6 got moved in the 40s, wasn't put on a foundation and deteriorated. Cottage 8 is the Riggs Cottage. That's still there. We have a cottage on lot 9. 10 was never built on. And Monte Carlo, going further north, Monte Carlo is still existent. Down on the lakefront, some of the Coast Guard buildings are still there, 3 of them, and a little house on the right. There's still a dock. And then there are 2 small houses across the road from Monte Carlo and the lodge. And then moving up toward the woods, here it's the west. Up on the top of the diagram, there's one cottage that the furthest cottage up there, furthest Newhall cottage, is still. It has the park has done a lot of work on that, and maybe that too will be used to house either park employees or volunteers. What's that? Oh, thanks, sir. Down on the south end, Bernique's has been, many of the buildings are gone, but the Bernique's had built a very distinctive log, quite a large log house, and so a lot of our outbuildings, and that house is still stands.
What about the tree?
The tree and the tree house. Yeah, the cottage in front of the tree house is gone, but the tree house is a shadow of its former self, but it's still there. So speaking about what's different, Kathy, that, just the sheer number of cottages and buildings and all, it's a different, very different feel. And I think the boardwalk might have lasted maybe sometime in the 20s. My mother used to tell stories about they never used the boardwalk because so many ground wasps nested in the wood that was left there. So, and now you can still see a very distinctive path. You can still see exactly where that boardwalk was, but it's been gone a long time. Good.
There's a Chicago connection to Bernique.
Oh, thank you. Chicago connection. Absolutely. The Bernique family, Colonel Alvar Bernique, had dancing studio. His family had dancing studios in Chicago, and they taught all of Chicago's elite young people ballroom dancing. He was quite a colorful character. He had been in this. He got his colonel from his work in his time in the Spanish-American War, and their cottage had as I said, a number of outbuildings, and the garage had a ballroom on top for a long time. It's often reserved. That's often a place referred to as a resort, but it really was a working farm. They had a lot of social activities and many amenities, but it was not a resort. It was a a family enterprise. Rob.
First, you completed an amazing piece of history about a place. And you've immersed yourself in it. You've done it with such impressive depth. As you come up for air, having finished this, and the marvelous product, the book, I'd be really interested in whether you have reflections on the importance and the value of this kind of history taking and history telling.
Yeah, this was a job in a way that I was given by my mother. She'd always hoped to write a book, and she did a tremendous amount she had my grandmother's memorabilia, her photos and her longhand remembrances of the beginnings of the resort. And she, at a time when you had to go to specific places to get information, she took her portable typewriter and she went to Detroit to the Burton collection, and you had to go to newspapers and look at microfiche, and we have notebooks full of her notes and information. I think that she got hung up with the idea that you kind of start with the dinosaurs to explain everything. And, there've been perfectly good books written about the history of Michigan and the Ice Age and all. But, those of us that know something so intimately, you get caught up in trying to explain it and help people understand from the very beginning. So she did not write a book, but she left boxes full of newspapers and magazines and books and photos. And I realized that if it were going to make a manageable product, have a manageable project, I really had to start with the island and just concentrate on what North Manitou and telling the stories that I knew. And it's when you grow up in some place, you can then, now with the computers and all, you can sit at your own desk and do a tremendous amount of work. And from the stuff that kind of what makes sense and what might be correct. And so I think for me, one of the most important things is I'm probably the last person that could tell this kind of story, because I had the material and I have the family experience. So I think that, and I felt that the photos, and thanks to Nancy Holyoke steering me in the right direction, you can tell all kinds of stories. You can have, lots of verbiage, but it seemed to me that the pictures were so valuable in telling what life was like that I had to concentrate on the pictures and use captions and use some other information, but primarily concentrate on the photos. And I don't know whether that really answers your question, but Ginny.
Major pieces that you had to leave out?
Oh, yeah. I'd have to really think about that. Maybe not so many major pieces, but the depth of, I would say, my brother Fred and I worked hard on the shipwreck chapter. That was I felt, because we were doing so many illustrations, that was very constrained by what images we could find, because there are tons and tons of information about shipwrecks. And there were hundreds of shipwrecks around, as you could tell from the how close the islands are to the mainland, tons of shipwrecks in this area. But to tell those stories that were compatible with the rest of the book, we had to find images, and that turned out to be a challenge. So I don't know, probably just more explanation.
More pictures.
More.
I'm sure there were a lot of pictures you would have liked to have in that.
Well, I have to say, Leelanau Press was marvelous about that. I really didn't have a lot of constraints about, you can only have 150 pages. So at Nancy and several other people suggested to me that I look at the images and really decide what I wanted to portray and what images I absolutely had to use, and really lay it out that way. And I would say we're always finding things. I found things since that would be fun to have included, but I, for the most part, I was able to use the best of what I had. Nancy.
Could you talk about the publisher and your experience with your editors and the back and forth, the whole publishing saga part of this? I'm also curious, it's been hard, like my sister Susie was trying to buy it and found it hard to find online, and I'm not quite sure where your publisher is located and where they, with their distribution.
Yeah, the so it's Leelanau Press, and it's a very small Northern Michigan publisher, and Barbara specializes in books and stories about the general Leelanau and that area. And so all of the books, I would say pretty much all the bookstores and the libraries in that area have the book. And we're working hard to try to figure out the whole online issues about just distribution, because it is a small press. She has a very small backlist, and it seems that as publishing is changing, there, at least my take on it right now, is that if you're self-published, there's kind of routes to go and places to get your books distributed. And then if you're a big publisher, that they have a route. So we're it's definitely a work in progress, and we're well aware that we need to find some ways of, when you Google stepping off the boat, where it shows up. So the book was published in Indianapolis and bound in Grand Rapids. It was a total learning experience for me about the mechanics of it and working with the graphic designer, and I learned a tremendous amount.
It's a beautiful.
Thank you.
You know, there's just not that many books on paper that are really gratifying. They just did a really nice job. Somebody put a lot of money behind it.
Yeah, thank you.
Let's do one more question in the room, and then let's get to signing. How about that?
Perfect. Yeah,
So,
Robbie.
I guess a good closer. What's the strangest thing you uncovered in the history of you? We want like the weird and the wacky. You got something.
They're endless mysteries. And the more you dive into the depths of these things, the more we don't know. For instance, Madeline and I speculate about how did these photo albums from the Newhall family end up at the Maritime Museum? Why didn't they go to the Chicago Historical Society, or Glencoe Historical Society? It was years before people who are really interested in North Manitou knew that these 4 photo albums that had dozens and dozens and dozens of pictures about North Manitou were sitting in this collection. So, and there, I don't know how Silas Boardman, I mean, he was a lumber merchant in Chicago, a retired banker. Clearly the lumber part of North Manitou might have been of interest, but how did he get there? How did he find out about North Manitou? Why did his sister-in-law buy up all these tax title warrants and, they allowed him to, well, why did he use her instead of just buying the land himself? And then, so he bought half the island in a very short period of time and, but he didn't lumber. He raised fruit and horses and cattle and farming stuff. I mean, so the record, unfortunately, the record is very spotty about a lot of detail that it took me, there was always an argument about, well, when were deer introduced, for instance, to the island? And well, some people knew it was about mid 1920s, and some people said 25, and some people said 27 and 28, and I don't think anybody probably at this point cares except me. I wanted to know the day, and it was 1926. And even some oral histories were incorrect about that. I found a newspaper article that could confirm, but that was only because now you're able to search that kinds of thing online and find these and some from some very small newspapers and so I would say that, and another thing that I'd like to emphasize is that there's going to be stuff that gets uncovered and more information that will correct some of the things that I've said in the book, I'm sure. But that's the nature of this kind of work. So.
Well, let's join me in giving Susan another round of applause. Thanks so much.